April 1st, I was hired on the W&OD Railroad as a less carload freight handler, and in about 2 months later I became a truck driver, delivering the freight to the stores, houses, etc. And in late 48, I was qualified as an engineer on the one-coach passenger trains, Mail and Express. And in 1949, began to practice with the freight locomotives. In 1951, I took a regular job as a freight engineer, and from then on till 1967, that was my daily chore, from Roslyn to Alexandria and west, and then back the same route that we came. And in 1967, I took the shop and repaired the locomotives and kept them in repair for the duration of the service until August 28, 1968.
Randolph?
I don't know when I started on freight. I can't remember, but I started before I was 16 years old on the section, working for my dad on the section. And you remember what year?
It was about 1953 or 4. No, you was with me in 1951. 1951 or 52, Randolph became a brakeman.
I come to Brakeman, yeah, but I worked with my dad on the railroad on the section for about
a year.
About a year before I got pulled in train service.
What did you do on the section?
I rebuilt tracks, put ties in, laid rail, and drove spikes. Anything that we need to do out there, we do it. I run the little motor car that we had to haul the men up and down the track on. And now I got my break to go in train service. They stopped and picked me up, and then I worked there with Doug and them until, I don't know, until I got my feet all broke up and couldn't do it anymore. But I worked there for at least 10, 15 years, I think. From the time I went to work on train service.
When you're working together as engineer and brakeman, what do they do together? I mean, did you have to work as a team?
Oh yeah, you had to be a team.
It was teamwork, or you couldn't accomplish your mission.
Especially at nighttime. You had to read your engineer's mind, he had to read yours. Because the only thing you had was a lantern to give him signals to go by. He couldn't, nothing that he could do, you know. I mean, it's dark and you back 10 or 15, 20 cars a length away from him. Only thing he could depend on was your light, or go ahead, come back, or stop, or really stop. That means throw the air down completely. Something is wrong somewhere.
I'll have to say this, if needs be.
Yeah, it was the only thing you had to depend on was one another to keep them getting, you know, you could really get hurt, killed or something. You didn't, especially when you had to go in and make the cars up and hook the air hose up and stuff. If the guy gets the wrong signal in the cab and it's nighttime, you don't know where you're at. Somebody gives him a wrong signal, you're just in trouble. But usually we never had anything like that to happen to us. We've done a lot of damage from other people and stuff like that, but we never, the crew, never had too much trouble with the crew working. Of course, we'd be working together practically every day, at least 15 hours, 55 minutes.
Back in those days,
that's all we could work.
15:55.
You get 8 off and come back.
You worked 16 hours solid, and you had to take 10 hours.
10 hours.
Were those union rules?
That was the FRA, the federal government rules, or ICC back in those days.
Yeah, yeah.
Then later it changed to FRA, Federal Railway Administration. But it was tough. We had 52-mile railroad one way and 108 grade crossings to fight our way through. after we got west of Falls Church, they began to thin out, but down into Arlington and part of Fairfax, it was a crossing every block or so. So it was tough going, and competition between the trains and the automobiles were pretty rough. 1967, August, we had a bad wreck on Shirley Highway, 28 people put in the hospital, an Army bus. His brakes failed. He hit 4 automobiles and then unloaded his windshield on the locomotive. And so those are the kind of things that makes you appreciate that you come out of it okay.
We had another one where that dump truck come down through there, that load of asphalt, hit that 55.
Took it over in the creek.
Knocked it over in the creek. Killed the guy that was driving the truck.
But railroading was dangerous at its safest. And everybody had to be on one schedule with their hearts and minds into it to accomplish a day's work safety. And to bring everybody back home safe, then this is the way we had to go to work, with our minds on our job and our minds on each employee to know where each one was. And it was an exciting time. You had no 2 days that were ever the same. There was always, if you had the same amount of cars in your train one day, they wouldn't handle like they did the day before. So it was always a different challenge. Every day when you got on your old locomotive, you faced a new day and hoped that everything would come out accordingly when you ended it up. And when we were working 16 hours a day, 15:55, then I would get home to Vienna about 1 o'clock in the morning and have to get back up at 5 again to be back to work at 6. So it didn't give much time to get much sleep, but we done a lot of work.
Yeah.
And enjoyed it.
I was going to ask you what time.
As a regular railroad day, you might call it, we were called at 6 a.m. normally. And of course, I had to service our locomotives. And if we needed sand, Mr. Schutz would help me get the sand. And we used 5-gallon buckets to pour it in the sand boxes. You had to pull it up over the hood of the locomotive and in the later years of the bigger locomotives and fill them completely up, because without sand you can't railroad. But we had to service our locomotives, put oil in them, water if necessary, sand, before we started each day's voyage. And then of course by starting in Roslyn, we would get our cars switched out from there that were empty and take them to Bluemont Junction and run around them, and then head down to Alexandria to the interchange point with the RF&P Railroad, and we would interchange on one Y and receive on the south Y and put our interchange on the north Y. And then in the early 60s, when the work really picked up, we got bigger locomotives, and then they gave us 3 tracks down in Potomac Yard. We went down over the hill in the north Y and interchanged our empties or loads or whatever we had, and then we would pick up the loads there and get them in our train and head west. And of course, before you could pull the first car, your conductor and brakeman would go down beside them and look at the serial numbers and copy the serial numbers, get the waybills and correspond them with the car number to make sure we had the right car. And so they had a busy job before we ever started pulling the cars from the interchange point to run around them, to switch them out. Cars that was scheduled to be set off prior to Bluemont Junction on our westward trip, we'd get them on the head in. And at one location at Shirley Highway with Virginia Concrete Company, we used to have to cut off east of Shirley Highway, bring our cement, stop just clear Shirley Highway, bleed the air from them, and give them a big jerk into a sidetrack, and then go down and spot them, and then go back and get your train and begin to head west. And as you got to each spot where you had a car, of course you had to set them off. Barcroft was another one where we always stopped way back down the hill. It was on a grade, and we stopped back way back far enough. We would jerk that car uphill into that siding and when they hit the switch, you'd see them sway a little, but they go on in there and spot them, put the derail on, tie them down, go back and get your train and start over. And at Bluemont Junction was our switching point, where we switched the eastbound cars that went for the Roslyn branch into one track and began to set our train up for the westbound movement in station order, from Falls Church, Vienna, Herndon, Sunset Hill, Herndon, and then on to Ashburn or Sterling, and into Leesburg, and then if we had to go west of Leesburg, you would have Peonian Springs, Hamilton, and Purcellville. All of them were normal freight, feed, fertilizer, coal, cinders, gasoline for Gulf plant there in Purcellville. We had a lot of good customers, and we enjoyed serving.
So it was a long day, huh?
Made a long day, and as I've often told people, you just turn. If you had a single unit, you just turn your hat around and start back east. If you had 2 units, you had to change ends, or 3 units, you change ends and operate from the rear unit that you brought up the road. You take that and be the head unit down the road. And we've seen a lot of violators of the crossing rules, so to speak, that put their families in harm's way to save 2 or 3 minutes until we clear the crossing. And of course, when we cleared each crossing, I always had a sigh of relief that, well, we made one more.
What did y'all do when you came up to a road crossing? How did you get across?
In all of them except Alexandria. There were 7 crossings in Alexandria. When we hit the Alexandria line, going in or coming out, we had to stop and hand flag every crossing. And we got back into Arlington, we could turn loose and go ahead and sneak up on them and get through.
Blow the heck out of the horn and ring the bell. But the others, we'd have to send a man up to flag the traffic down. That was like sending a bull to a china closet, trying to get so many people to stop.
I remember one incident at Commonwealth Avenue in Alexandria. Mr. Schutz was on the crossing, flagged a man down, and he got hit by the train, and the judge said if you hadn't been out there flagging him, he'd have made it. So we didn't get much consolation from the courts. We had to fight our own battles every day.
Yep.
Is that who would you usually go out with the flag?
He was my westbound flagman.
Yeah, we had.
And the eastbound flagman would go east. The westbound flagman, and they would reverse their standings. Randolph would do all the lining up when we got to Bluemont Junction, because the head brakeman, he throwed the switches and done that. Randolph done the cutting, placing, spotting, and all of that on our westbound movements.
Who was the head brakeman?
He was.
Oh, you were the head brakeman.
I was the head brakeman.
And then who else was on the crew?
Well, sometime we had Arthur Cole, which was Randolph's uncle, or somebody else, and he would take care of the eastbound movements, and Randolph took care of the westbound movements. So you reversed your standing. You was the rear man going up, you'd be the head man coming back.
And our conductor was Red Mahoney. It was just 4 of us that worked together.
We made big changes in railroads. Today you have 2-man crews. We had 4 men. We were lucky. And back in those days we had LCL freight, which we had to spot at each freight station and unload the freight for the Vienna station with a number of customers, small shipments, known as less carload. We'd handle them all the way to Purcellville, and then the agents, of course, would notify the patrons, and they'd pick them up. But it was kind of it was an exciting job, especially unloading cattle. We even had to handle cattle at times.
Unload the cattle.
And they usually showed up on the weekend, Saturday or Sunday. So we'd have to make a special run to Leesburg or Purcellville with a load of cattle, which they had to be unloaded within 48 hours after watering, or watered again. So when Potomac Yards or RF&P would notify us, cattle were going to arrive a certain time, we had to be ready to grab them and roll. Because we didn't have water facilities, we had just stock pens to unload them. and the freight crew unloaded the cattle.
Unloaded them cattle.
And as a small line railroad, we done a little more extra work than if we saw a switch that needed to put a little oil on or greasing, we'd do that. We all work together as a team, even including the section. Sometimes we'd have to do a little section work, but it was all exciting and we enjoyed it.
Did the train guys know the section guys, and did everybody pretty much know everybody?
Family.
Oh yeah, everybody knew them.
Granddaddy.
We had a couple guys that was on another crew, but they was kind of didn't want nobody messing with their job or something like that. But you know what I'm talking about.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There's always strange folks in every category of life.
And every chance we got, we could do something to mess him up. But the rest of them just like a family, you know. My dad was section foreman there for years and years in Herndon. And he worked part-time train service too if he needed. Guy didn't show up or somebody called in sick. They'd call on Dad to come down there and do that run that day.
We had several family groups, such as Randolph's family and the Cunningham family. There was a dad, 3 boys, and all of them would work at one time. There was, for a week or two at a time, the dad was the engineer, one of the boys was a conductor, and the other 2 were brakemen, so they worked as a family, and they were good people.
Yeah. Good
employees. Mr. Cunningham hired me in 1947, or showed me the place where I could get hired. Hauled me down on the passenger train. I hired that morning, April 1st. I went to work as soon as I got hired and worked the rest of the day, and then rode the passenger train home. This was a new world for an 18-year-old kid.
You must have liked it.
I enjoyed it.
And I wasn't quite 16 when I went to work for my dad. I wouldn't go to school, so the judge told me that you either go to work or go to school. So my dad said I'd put him to work.
And he did.
Yeah, he did. Swinging a 10-pound hammer all day long, driving spikes, building track.
And to see the railroad men driving spikes, you'd set that spike, and then 2 of them would drive the same spike. And there were clash hammers.
And you crisscross the rails the other side.
So we've done a little bit of everything. We've done a little track work, whatever was necessary to be done. But an enjoyable 20-some years until it closed up in 1968. I put the last 4 locomotives down in Potomac Yard August 28, 1968. It was a sad day. And I didn't know what I was going to do from that point on, but it all worked out.
Did anybody come out to see the last train in the town?
I put them down there by myself. There was on the last day people in Falls Church. I've got a picture at home that shows a group there at Falls Church on the 9155, the locomotive that the B&O sent over to finish up our chores with. And then I put all of them down in Potomac Yard the next day. Wasn't nobody with flowers or nothing on the last day. It was sad. Shoved them out of there and down over the hill and tied them down there, and they shipped them on to Baltimore. And we looked out over the old viaduct from the roundhouse and wondered what was the next move, but there was a next move for us. So we all come out, and after leaving there, I went with the C&O B&O as a transportation officer. Ended up train master in Richmond in 1977.
I think about 2 or 3 years before it closed down, I got hurt and I had to.
Yeah, you were gone about 4 years, I think.
Yeah. I got throwed off a boxcar in Leesburg. I was putting the brake on, setting it to leave the car, and the whole thing pulled off in my hand like that. It drove me backwards. And this foot here landed on the rail, flipped over. I had this angle all broke up and had the other one all broke up too.
I was told he was still holding the brake wheel when he hit the ground.
And they said if I didn't know what I was doing, because when the hitching bar where you couple them together, they stick out about that far behind the car. Couplers. And they said if I didn't know what I was doing, I pushed myself away from that. I would have straddled that thing, and then I'd been in problems. But they had come take me to Leesburg, and I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, 3 weeks in Leesburg Hospital. And
this was at Barber and Ross siding, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. We put a vote. Were you working that night?
No, I wasn't with you that day. I was on the East End.
No. But whoever was that, they couldn't find me. The engineer couldn't. I never give them a signal to go or nothing. And so they sent Brakeman back there, and I was laying out on the track. Done off my lantern and everything. Because that thing you carried on your arm at nighttime when it's your third arm. That's what you needed.
That's your buddy.
That's your pal, your buddy. That's the engineer's buddy to tell him where you at, what you want him to do.
And I'll say the lantern that the brakeman used was the go-ahead to a safe railroading. Randolph was a good brakeman, gave good signals. I could understand them, read them just like a book. But you have run into some of them that you couldn't read them on cross stitch because they didn't just give you clear signals. Clear signals with a lantern to an engineer is his white line in the highway.
Yeah, some of them just, you give them a fast signal, and the engineer would speed up, and you only had so far to go, you'd knock him clear out of his seat, sitting up in that cab.
All the years I worked with Randolph, he never unseated me.
But, you had to know what the heck he was doing with that lantern. It was just like a third arm for you. At nighttime, you needed it.
And then when we began to haul the Dulles Airport materials, we did have a handset. It was heavy, it weighed about 5 pounds, with a strap and a radio, two-way radio to the cab and from the brakeman back where you couldn't see them. We had on much longer trains from that point. In our Dulles Airport building, we put in somewhere in the neighborhood of 41 or 4,200 loads, sand, gravel, and building material. And so when we got to handling the longer trains, the radio was very necessary for us.
And we used that having your fourth arm.
Yeah.
Same way when we weigh stone that come out of the quarry up there.
We had to weigh those.
We had to take into.
We weighed them at Blue Mountain Junction. We had a pair of scales. You pulled in off of the main line and weighed them in motion as you move them one to the other and get them all weighed, and then we'd go on into Alexandria and deliver them. We had 2 locations for the rock quarry, Roslyn and Alexandria. And so we did handle, in the road building times of the year, we handled a lot of stone from Trap Rock, which is Lux Quarry now. And that was a big financial gift for the railroad. For the summer, it helped us get through the winter when things were lean. And we all worked together in order to make our railroad operate.
You said earlier that you both knew Baggett.
Did you ever meet Mr. Baggett Randolph?
I don't think I did.
He was a little short, bald-headed fellow. I met him the first day I hired. He gave me a little talking to. And he was a very gentle old gentleman, very nice person to deal with. And I've never heard him raise his voice. Never did to me or anyone else. We had a few customers, sometimes we'd call him about some of the things that had happened, and he'd call us and talk to us, and that was the end of it.
What kind of things would people call him about?
Well, when the passenger train was running, we had a lady in Loudoun County that would call him because I was a young engineer. She'd report me said I was running too fast, but I kept my schedule because I had my watch, and that's always necessary. Hold on, let's go.
Who was that lady in Leesburg?
Mrs. Fletcher. Lived on just west of Comfort before you got down to, was that Sigmund Creek? Yeah. And she lived up on top of the hill there. We had a station stop, Pleasant View, I think, if I remember correctly. But she would turn us in and she'd fuss about everything. She wasn't satisfied. When the passenger train was taking off, she fussed about that. When they was on, she fussed about it and rode them every 6 months. But she still kept us going. So in dealing with the public, I enjoyed doing it. As back in my early railroad days, during the time I was from a truck driver up, I qualified as a flagman on the passenger train and also a conductor. Took up the tickets, and so we enjoyed every minute of it. Never knew what the next day would bring, but we'd find out something.
Did you ever have times during your 15-hour, 55-minute day that things got a little boring or you had downtime?
We didn't have much downtime. Now, we did stop at Partlow store on our eastward trip, get us a little piece of cheese and some ginger snaps. That was our supper till we got home. But we always had something going on to keep us occupied because there wasn't too many miles between stations, so you didn't have time to get bored like a 4 or 5 hour run. You was always stopping and starting and doing something different.
Yeah, we made sneak a little nap in while well, the engineer, he couldn't nap, but we did.
That you be careful.
No, never caught Doug sleep. But we had one guy, Arthur Cole, he'd go to sleep so he'd sit down in the cab.
I remember one incident where William Mahoney was a brakeman conductor. That Arthur brought his lunch. Arthur Cole had put his lunch on the locomotive, and Mahoney had found a baby rabbit. He brought the baby rabbit in the locomotive and took his sandwiches out and put that baby rabbit in his lunchbox. And so when Arthur opened it, the rabbit jumped out and he fell out on the floor. So there was always somebody pulling a joke on you, doing one thing or the other. Kept us going.
Yep.
What was Partlow's store like? It was just a little country store
Little
back
country
then.
store.
Mm-hmm. So.
And I even, when we stopped to get a piece of cheese and some ginger snaps, I'd get a few things for home, so I'd put them in a bag. When I went home, I had my groceries.
Did they have, like, made sandwiches, or did they have like a butcher shop in there? Or?
They had a meat counter where you could buy the stuff and a loaf of bread and make your own.
Fresh bologna, you know, and they had a big roll and cut you off what you wanted.
The Partlow brothers were good folks. They treated us just like we were family. And I met a lady yesterday at the motel here in Leesburg that was a daughter to the Fletchers that owned the Fletcher Mill, Ashburn Milling Company in Ashburn. They called her Peanut. She was a little short lady, and I talked to her husband, and she said, I told him where I did. I was a retired railroad person, and he retired and moved to Indianapolis or somewhere. But he said, my wife was a Fletcher from Ashburn. I said, from the Ashburn Milling Company? Yeah, her dad owned it. So we had a discussion, and I knocked on the door. I said, is Peanuts in there? And so we had to, how'd you know my name was Peanuts, she said. And so we find somebody that knows about us somewhere along the line in life.
Were they any relation to Nellie Fletcher?
No, they wouldn't have, they didn't cross wires. They was a different breed.
We're still trying to find Nellie Fletcher's relatives, if she's got any.
I think she run them all off.
When you got to Percival with the load, what did you do? What was it like around the Percival station?
Well, at Percival station, you had a 5-car runaround. When I say a runaround, it's just a little track with open ends on both ends on the main line. And so when we get our work done and spotted up in Percival, then we'd put our cars back down the main line and run around them and then head east. We had a track behind the station for team track work, and we'd line them up if we had coal to put on the trestle. You couldn't run your locomotive over the trestle. So you had to have some reachers to get it out there where it belonged, and then pull the team car back behind the station and then come on the other end and spot your gas and etc. And I do remember one time we had to make 3 runarounds at Purcellville in order to get all the cars lined up. We had them clear back across the main road that come just west of the station. We had about 15 cars out of Purcellville. That's the biggest haul I ever come out of Purcellville with. So you'd have to shove them in the runaround or down the main line, run around them and shove them back, go get some more and do the same thing with them until you put them together. We had at Alexandria one time, Randolph and myself, we had 65 cars to get around, and we had a 20 car runaround. So we had to do double duty that day to run around them and get them behind us. But it was accomplished.
When we started hauling that stuff with the airport, that's when we really got busy. We built the airport, built Dallas Airport. I mean, we hauled some cars out of Potomac yards to that airport. They'd all have to be spotted so they could drop them down, load the sand, stuff like that. We even took some equipment up there.
Yeah, spotted that at Herndon.
Yeah.
Had one of the world's biggest earth moving machine was on 4 flat cars. It was so big they had to put it together in pieces. Too big to haul in one piece. So we hauled quite a variety of equipment for them.
Yeah. We had them 3 C&O locomotives. Sometimes we run all 3 of them together.
Most of the time when we were handling Dulles.
When we were handling stuff for the airport.
Were you hauling stuff for the airport about every day?
Every day we'd get a train out of Alexandria. And of course that came from Richmond. The sand and gravel came from the Commonwealth Sand and Gravel, and in years to come, how little did I know that I'd be the train master at Richmond to handle the same loads that I pulled. So it's a small world.
There was something else I was going to ask you, and I've completely forgot it now.
Another thing we always carried, every engineer or brakeman had Doug did too, carried extra food with them. If you didn't, sometimes you'd get caught out there, you'd be hungry before you get something to eat. And I never ate so many Vienna sausages and crackers in my life, and sardines in a can. Just anything we get our hands on to throw in our box to keep in case we...
We always kept an axe and a shovel.
Yeah.
In case we run into problems. In 1955, Hurricane Hazel came through Reston, which was Sunset Hills at that time, and we cut 7 trees before we got in that trip. It was a rough night. The trees just were small trees, uproot. We hit one on Hunter Hill coming down, and it caught the grab arm on the cars and pulled it up and separated the train, and there was a tree in between 2 pieces of train, so we had to use our axe that night for sure.
The railroad was the coldest place to work in the wintertime and hottest in the summertime.
And back when Randolph and I was working together out of Alexandria before we got the radios and this kind of stuff, the brakeman had to ride on top of the cars. If you were shoving cars ahead of you, they had to be up there as your eyes. And we really did do some shoving and pushing and pulling with our boys on top.
So you would ride on top the whole
thing.
And I've seen Randolph come out of a sidetrack, give me a go-ahead signal. He'd come up over the rear car, and while we were in motion, he would get us, he'd be to the engine before I'd get too many steps down the main line. He'd come on over top. He was a good acrobat because he could hang on to them.
So it got pretty cold up there during the winter?
Oh, he was riding up on top of them things and get across that bridge, take them across the Potomac Yard Bridge. Mustache would be froze. Yours be froze. I don't care how many clothes you put on, you still get cold.
Yes, you would.
'Cause it was cold out there then. Snow up to you. Yang yang.
And when you had ice storms was a dangerous time too. Your grab irons on the cars
Everything
would
would get
freeze, and so you just had a dangerous situation. We had to go much slower in those circumstances for the safety part of it.
And catwalk on top of it, that's what they call it, catwalk. You could, ice would freeze on them things and
Today we have
Yeah, it'd be
we have no
slipping everywhere.
catwalks. They're taking off the cars all the way. In any car that has a catwalk on it, you have to do something on top of it to unload it. Otherwise, you don't get on top of them because there's no ladders.
Another thing I was going to ask about, I've seen photos of a spray train, and I think I've seen your photo hanging off of a spray train. What did they do? Can you describe that?
That was a weed killer
weed
train.
killing, yeah.
And it was, back in those days, it was oil based, and you really need a lot of sand the following day to operate because it would leave a film on your rail. Without the sand, your traction, you can't railroad without sand, even on dry days. But after a spray train came through, you was in trouble until the sun come out and dried it up, and you had plenty of sand to get over it.
You'd be out there putting sand down on the rail in front of you.
I've seen times where we used a Coca-Cola can, cut the top out of it, and scoop it out of the sandbox because the sand pipe was stopped up underneath, and stand down on the footboard and put a little sand in it to give us enough traction to go. But we always accomplished it.
So there was an automatic, some sort of a sander that...
Yes, you had a button or a little lever in your cab
Yeah.
for your front sanders or your back sanders, and if you had 3 or 4 locomotives, you could always, they worked from the front one, so all of them would sand. But you had to have sand to railroad. You couldn't do it without it. And that's still the same today. They just have automatic sanders now. In the modern equipment, if your wheel slip, the sand starts. You don't even have to push the button.
Well, that's...
So we've come a long way.
Come a long way with that, yeah.
Air-conditioned cabs.
Yes, you didn't have
We didn't have to open the door.
Open the door, eat the bugs and stuff at nighttime coming down the mountains with the door open. We enjoyed it.
I've got a photo of a train in Herndon with a flat car right behind the locomotive with chairs sitting on the flat car.
I wonder what age that had on it.
That was from the early 60s.
I don't remember what them the chairs was for. Unless it was a brakeman took their chair out of the locomotive, went back there and sat down.
Just, it looked kind of interesting.
Yes. Now that would be on a tourist train if it had very many chairs.
Yeah, it was just a couple, 2 or 3 chairs maybe.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Me and Randolph never had that much time to sit down.
Uh-huh.
We had to roll.
Doesn't sound like it.
We had to roll all the time.
So the street started getting busy and a lot more traffic. Was it a gradual thing?
Yes. As after World War II, it was moderate traffic because they depended on the trains and streetcars and etc. And as time went on, we had more automobiles and more traffic, and so we had more competition to get through. I've had some awful scary places, especially crossing road crossings, facing school buses and this type of thing.
Were the motorists ever unhappy that they had to wait for you?
Well, I remember an occasion one time going down 4 Mile Run that this fellow run across in front of us, and this other fellow was sitting on the opposite side. Well, I put the train in emergency, and Randolph started down the steps, and somebody in an automobile said, called him a feather baiter. It was back in the early 70s, no, 60s, that the railroads were getting rid of firemen, and they called the fireman a feather baiter. because there wasn't much action on the diesel for a fireman. And when the man called Randolph a feather beder, Randolph went to get him, but he took off in his car. Randolph told him, if you think I'm a feather beder, come out here and follow me one day.
It was hard work, but it was enjoyable.
We always look forward to the next day. I did. Mom said I didn't spend enough time at home, but I didn't have much time to spend. 4.5 hours sleep, and then you'd be back ready to go again. But the short line railroad is something that's coming back into being now. They done away with it a few years ago. It's quite a few, but a lot of short lines are coming back into existence again because they're unprofitable for the big railroaders, and yet there's enough for the small railroaders to accomplish it. And so we had an enjoyable short line railroad, and all employees, I think, enjoyed every minute of it.
Did y'all get to know the people in the towns and stations that
Oh,
worked
yes.
around there?
Yes. There wasn't many people up and down the railroad we didn't know.
That's the girls.
Watch it, Randolph. But if as I look back over it, if I could do it again, I'd do it again.
Me too.
It was that enjoyable to us to know we was accomplishing something to better somebody else. And so I enjoyed it immensely.
And back then, if you done your job, you had a job. You didn't have to worry about where the next meal was coming from.
I started on the railroad making 60 cents an hour in 1947. And the little old railroad was good to us. It was a family-oriented railroad, so Mr. Davis Elkins, senator from the state of West Virginia, was the owner of it when I went to work. And so we accomplished quite a bit. And then it was later taken over by the C&O Railroad in 1956.
Did you ever get to meet him or see Mr. Elkins?
I'd seen his wife. Yes, I had met him in his apartment over on Connecticut Avenue. We went over to, I took something over for him for the headquarters, and took it over to the apartment and met Mr. Elkins, and he was getting along in years and wasn't able to get out. And his son didn't want to fool with the railroad, and neither did his daughters, and so they traded the C&O stock, and from that point on it was owned by the C&O. And now, of course, we see blacktop up and down it.
Yep.
Well, I'll put you on the spot here. Are there any other stories we haven't talked about yet? Any good stories or anything interesting you'd like to say?
Well, at this point, I can't think of any more. We've covered quite a bit in which I wish there was something else I could remember. But when you get 74, your memory is not as good as it was when you're 16.
Well, at 46, sometimes it's a little tough to remember, too. Was there anything, Steve, that we didn't cover?
There was some that thought they knew everything, didn't know nothing. But, you know, unfortunately, I didn't have to work with them, but maybe one day or something, if Doug had to take a day off or something, then we'd have to have another engineer. Same way as our conductor. Reg Mahoney was the best guy I worked for. He was a great guy. But outside that, and my other brakeman, it would be like part of the family when you four was together again, working.
And as the majority of the time, it was you and Duck.
Yeah, Arthur Cole.
Arthur Cole, which was your uncle.
It would see my uncle, my grandfather worked on there, on the section with my dad and my brother. So.
And then your uncle Russell got sick and was unable to come back, and it was about 1951, and that's when I started on the freight regular, July of 1957.
That might be what I was talking about. He got killed in a car wreck not too long after that.
Oh, it was?
Yeah. But I think he got really sick in Falls Church.
Yeah, yeah,
They took him off.
yeah.
And that's when they picked me up, and that's when I got in train service.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you had some cousins.
George Huff.
Hmm?
George
Thorne.
Thorne.
Yeah.
Was one of them two that got.
But see, back in those days, when I first started with the short line, the engineer and conductors, they might be a conductor today or engineer tomorrow, whichever one they needed, they called them for it. But when I started, we sort of separated it. I wanted to leave Randolph as a brakeman and do my work outside, and I do his inside. And so that's the way it was from then on. When him and I was working together, you had your engineers, you had your conductors, you had your brakemen. And our old chief dispatcher, Mr. McLaney, he lived about a block and a half from the dispatcher's office up on the hill. And he was always close. I've got a timed train sheet of December of 1951, and he had a problem with his hand. He was a telegraph operator for years, and they say that this is what caused it. He had trouble holding his hand to write, so you had to learn his writing before you could read it. But Mr. McLaney was a fine old dispatcher, and we enjoyed working for him.
Carl, what was that guy?
Carl Croson.
Croson, yeah.
Carl Croson. He was an engineer, and he took a dispatcher's job.
At nighttime, like that, he was a dispatcher at nighttime, or on the weekends, or whatever.
No, he was full-time. He worked the evening shift all the time.
Yeah.
After old man Hughes retired.
Yeah.
He was, old man Hughes was the night dispatcher. He didn't have much to do after 12 o'clock unless we were extremely late. He used to bring his pajamas with him. He just kept watch over the stove, make sure it was warm during the next morning when the dispatcher came in. But I've got a train sheet of our activity for that particular day. We went to work at 9 o'clock on the 5th of December. We got off 12:30 the following morning. And so we had a right long day then. You was my brakeman on that. D.C. Mahoney and myself, you and Arthur.
Yeah. And like I say, it's like Doug, if I had to do it over again,
could
do the same thing exactly like I've done everything.
I know there's a lot of people who'd like to see the trains running again.
I'm sure.
A lot of us like to be able to ride them.
That's, yeah.
At least just to try it out.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I can't think of any.